Fallout 3's use of architecture and other design elements in its world building is really good. All the world building is really good. I would go so far as to say that Fallout 3's world building is even better than Oblivion's world building. Now, before all you Fallout fans start popping your champagne corks, Fallout 3 suffers from the exact same problem Oblivion did. Apparently, this issue is just as much a part of a Bethesda game as a cow randomly floating off into space. Just as with Oblivion, Bethesda's aesthetic and philosophical choices, the things that define and unify the world building, actively undermine Fallout 3's world building. Fallout 3's problem is that Bethesda's aesthetic, their retro-futuristic 1950s sci-fi aesthetic, is incompatible with Bethesda's philosophy, specifically their social commentary. The problem is so bad that the more you think through it, the more world-breaking it becomes.
Architectural Outcast.
Randy here from the Architectural Outcast. A lot of good videos here on YouTube will point out that Fallout 3, all of the Fallout series for that matter, isn't retrofuturism. And they're right. Sort of. It's futurism. Kinda. Now stick with me because this is going to get a bit convoluted, but it's important to understand what's going on. Futurism, retrofuturism, it's all the same thing, right? Aren't we just splitting hairs? Well, in a lot of context, you would be. There's enough overlap that how you define one or the other really doesn't matter. But with Fallout, the distinction is very important. If I sit here right now and try to predict what architecture, interior design, cars, fashion, technology will be like in 100 years, that's futurism. Whereas if I sat here today and tried to imagine what the future would look like if it was based upon a pre-existing design aesthetic, say like the 1950s, that's retrofuturism. These two approaches to imagining the future have a key difference. Now, I would argue that this difference is what gives each one its unique charm, but this difference matters when it comes to storytelling. Futurism always assumes that progress will be linear, that all new developments, whether we be talking design or technology, will just be further refining and perfecting of what has come before. Retrofuturism, on the other hand, is looking back at a previous era's design and technology. However, it's going to be influenced by every single design and technology innovation that has come along in the meantime. Fallout is a science fiction story about the future of a universe that split from our universe at the end of World War II. But the story is told from the perspective of somebody in that universe's 1950s looking towards their future. So Fallout is futurism. But America of that world future has created a society, socially, economically, politically, and aesthetically inspired by their 1950s. So within the story, it's retrofuturism. Are you all confused yet? You should be, because Bethesda was confused. The storytelling was too clever by half because it created a paradox. If the design and technology is from the perspective of someone in the 1950s telling the story, then it should be a refinement of what came before without any outside influences whatsoever. On the other hand, if the story is being told from the perspective of the people of that future America, all of their design and technological innovations should be wrapped within a 1950s aesthetic. Bethesda did the worst thing possible. They tried to split the baby. The technology is from the perspective of the 1950s storyteller, but the design, and in particular the architecture, has some real interesting non-1950s, non-American influences. As presented, not only did America go back to a 1950s inspired culture, socially, politically, economically, and aesthetically, they went back to a 1950s inspired technology, and in the process, throwing away all of their modern innovations. Now, this could happen. and it could be a fun topic to explore. But at a bare minimum, you need to explain why a country would decide to do this, seeing how, at the time, America was in a life and death struggle with various communist countries. While Bethesda is pretty good at maintaining their 50s-esque technology, their design, specifically their architecture, is a bit of a mess. It's all over the place. This is a problem because of Bethesda's philosophical choices, specifically their social commentary. Bethesda's not the first to use 1950s Americana to condemn American culture. But then again, you aren't playing Bethesda games for their groundbreaking storytelling. Fallout argues that the American experiment was based upon a lie. Rugged individualism, patriotism, family values, liberty, justice for all are all just a facade that makes it easier for a cynical, totalitarian government to manipulate the unwashed masses. That the Cold War wasn't a battle between capitalism and communism, it was a battle between fascism and communism. I'm not here to critique Bethesda's social commentary. That's a whole nother conversation. A storyteller can tell whatever story they want to tell, and this is the story that Bethesda chose to tell. But the issue at hand is that they used the wrong architecture to tell that story. 1950s American architecture had a lot of influences. Two of the biggies which inspired Fallout's aesthetic are modernism and mid-century modern. And despite the fact that they both have modern in their name, they're two different things. They come from two separate philosophical traditions, and they're both meant to communicate two very different, you could even say diametrically opposed messages. Mid-century modern comes out of an architectural tradition that can trace its roots all the way back to the Greeks and Romans, whereas modernism was the conscious rejection of history. It was an attempt to create a modern architecture for a modern audience. The mid-century modern aesthetic that most people associate with the 1950s, gas stations, diners, drive-ins, apartment buildings, private residences, comes out of an architectural tradition that was developed in the 1920s and 30s, Art Deco, but more specifically, three variants of Art Deco: Streamlined Art Deco, Southwest Art Deco, and Texas Art Deco. The easiest way to describe the difference between the earlier Art Deco styles and mid-century modern is Art Deco cranked up to 11. It's bold. It uses bright, saturated colors: candy apple red, teal, aquamarine. And when in doubt, just add a little extra neon. You know what they say, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. America had just survived 20 years of misery, pain, and death. Great Depression, World War II. But America hadn't just survived, they'd come out the other side the most influential culture in the world. With mid-century modern, America chose an architecture that fit its mood. Celebratory, proud, and self-confident. Rooted in America's artistic traditions, but excited for the future. They were so excited about the future, they weren't afraid to sprinkle in their own futurism. Each piece of mid-century modern architecture was supposed to be unique and different. It was a celebration of the uniqueness that is every single one of us. Modernism, on the other hand, it wasn't developed here in America. It came out of Western Europe. France, Italy, and Germany. And it was designed, pun very much intended, to promote the philosophy of Marxism. The French-Swiss architect Le Corbusier was upfront and honest about modernism's goals when he famously said, "A modernist building is supposed to be a machine for living." Modernism was meant to crush the spirit of the individual and celebrate the collective. In the mid-30s, prominent American socialists like Philip Johnson started bringing modernism into America, and by the 1950s, it had become popular in certain circles. That's why whenever you think of 1950s architecture, you have two distinct architectures come to mind. On one hand, we have a pop culture architecture, gas stations, drive-ins, diners, car culture. Mid-century modern is a middle-class architecture, fiercely independent, proud and self-confident, rooted in America's traditions, but excited for the future. And on the other hand, we have modernism, the architecture of government, social institutions, and corporations, all seeking to control this new affluent and powerful culture. And then along comes Bethesda, who wants to tell a story about a future America where the American people look to their past in an effort to preserve their identity. But that identity is just a facade that makes it easier for a totalitarian government to manipulate and control the American people. In an effort to tell that story, Bethesda goes and chooses these two particular architectural styles to try to mix and match. What is it that I keep saying around here? If you're going to mess around with symbolism, you better know what you're doing. Clearly, Bethesda didn't know what they were doing. This is the unnecessary problem that Bethesda created for themselves by having what happens in the story, retrofuturism. Anytime you look to the past for design inspiration, you editorialize. You pick and choose what you're going to use. Yet, we are supposed to believe that a future American culture would feel so threatened they would turn to their past to protect their unique identity, and to that end, they choose a foreign architecture that promotes the very ideology they are in a life and death struggle with? Methinks that stretches credulity. This gets back to the issue between futurism and retrofuturism. In futurism, if you start in the 1950s and have continuous development moving forward, well, modernism was part of the 1950s landscape, both literally and figuratively, so it would make sense that it would also continue to be developed going forward, no matter where it came from and what it was trying to communicate. The reason why Fallout's pre-war America had this wholesome Americana 1950s aesthetic was to make it easier for a totalitarian government to manipulate and control the American people. And to that end, it makes sense to use mid-century modern architecture. The last thing a government who's trying to hide the fact that they're totalitarian by waving the American flag would do is choose a foreign architecture that promotes totalitarianism. You could say, but Randy, modernism is more nuanced than that. Depending on the context, it could have all sorts of different meanings. And you're right, and we could have that conversation. But here's the thing. Bethesda, in their efforts to imagine how modernism would evolve into the future, they ended up copying another architectural style. Soviet realism, complete with Soviet realism sculptures. Speaking of different architectural styles, you can make the argument that Fallout isn't retrofuturism, because whenever you copy a historic architectural style and you remove it from its original context and separate it from its original meaning, that is another architectural style, postmodernism. This is the fun thing about architectural interpretation, though. Bethesda thought they were telling one story with their architecture, but the architecture as presented is telling a very different story. We have a war between the American middle class and the government, social institutions, corporations. The American middle class is desperately trying to defend their independence, their freedom, their individuality. And the government and these institutions are trying to assert control over every aspect of the middle class. The government, social institutions, and corporations, in their quest for never-ending power, blew up the world, ended up destroying themselves. But the American middle class survived, endured, and are now beginning to build a new America. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend y'all read the original Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Fallout is just another retelling of that story. This time around, though, Bethesda took the side of the institutions. At any rate, I hope I've given you all something to think about, and until next time, y'all be safe. If y'all are still here, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. While you're at it, why don't you like this video, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell. You can hear me yammer on about something else next time. And feel free to share this video far and wide.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.